There's a comforting story that a lot of us grew up with. Democracy was the default setting of the West.
And freedom and democracy.
Freedom and democracy.
And freedom and democracy.
Democracy.
En démocratie.
Das Demokratie.
La democracia.
The United States had democracy. Britain had democracy. So did France, Germany, the Nordic countries, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And yeah, sure, maybe some countries were messier than others. The United States has its electoral college, the United Kingdom has unelected lords, and France had street protests every 45 minutes. But broadly speaking, we told ourselves that there were democracies and authoritarian countries. And the line between them was clear. Except now that line is getting blurry. Because the real question is no longer, does a country hold its elections? It's what happens around those elections. Are the courts independent? Can journalists investigate power? Can civil servants refuse illegal orders? Can universities, NGOs, and public broadcasters operate without being financially intimidated? Because a country can still hold elections, but lose the liberal part of a liberal democracy. That's actually the warning at the center of this year's VDEM analysis, which downgraded the United States from a liberal democracy to an electoral democracy, citing that the country has not simply experienced political polarization, but a weakening of the liberal checks that make elections meaningful in the first place. And that raises a much bigger question. Is the United States the warning sign? Or is this just one case in a much larger Western pattern? So in today's video, we're looking at where democracy is weakening, where it is strengthening, and why the future of democracy in the West may depend less on whether people vote and more on whether institutions survive the people they vote for. So, let's take a look. First things first. Before the war erupting in the comments really kicks off, let's define a few terms. When political scientists say liberal democracy, they do not mean left-wing democracy. They mean a system of two parts. First, democracy. Free, fair elections, political competition, voting rights, parties, parliaments, and peaceful transfers of power. The second is liberalism, but in the constitutional sense. So here you would have things like the rule of law, individual rights, independent courts, limits on executive power, free press, civil society, and protections for minorities. So a country can be democratic in one sense, people vote, while still becoming less liberal in another sense. The winner uses state power to weaken everyone's ability to compete next time. That's why modern democratic backsliding probably doesn't look as dramatic as it sounds. It doesn't look like a grand coup d'etat with tanks in the streets. Most of the time, it looks like paperwork. It looks like election law changes and replacing independent regulators. It looks like defunding public media and attacking judges as enemies of the people, or putting loyalists into the civil service and flooding the cabinet members with sycophants. And this is why the United States matters so much. Not because America is uniquely bad, but because the United States was supposed to be one of the countries where this just simply could not happen. But it also underscores why it is so important that we are able to measure and track democratic governance globally. The Varieties of Democracy, or the VDEM Institute, that I mentioned at the beginning of this video has been doing just that at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Now, I think what's really cool is that instead of just relying on single evaluations, the VDEM Institute utilizes over 3,000 country experts to assess more than 500 indicators, dating as far back as 1789. Their research consistently maps autocratization trends worldwide, tracking how governments that still hold elections can simultaneously erode the rule of law, attack the press, and undermine institutional checks and balances. So to illustrate what this looks like in practice, let's take a look at the United States. VDEM's 2026 report found that the United States Liberal Democracy Index score fell by 24%, dropping it from 20th to 51st in the world. VDEM specifically pointed to the concentration of executive power, efforts to weaken checks and balances, politicization of civil service and oversight bodies, pressure on the judiciary, and attacks on the press, academia, civil liberties, and dissent. That is an extraordinary statement about a country that still thinks of itself as the world's democracy referee. So, in political science, there's this term, executive aggrandizement, and essentially it's the process where elected leaders do not necessarily abolish democracy in one dramatic moment, but gradually expand executive power while weakening the institutions that could stop them. And that, I think, is the key to understand what's going on at the moment. For example, the Trump administration and its allies over the past 2 terms have systematically sought to delegitimize, incapacitate, and politicize the independent civil service. Officials in the Justice Department, the Centers for Disease Control, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, state and local election offices, and other government agencies were pressured, threatened, even fired, and independent research investigations and assessments were altered to comport with the claims and preferences of the administration. Now, to be fair here, the danger is not just one president. To lay this all at the feet of one man is dangerous and disingenuous. The danger is a political movement learning which parts of the system are optional. And make no mistake, things are getting more and more optional. Recently, we received the landmark Supreme Court final ruling in the Trump v. Slaughter case. And this is perhaps the most obvious example of a major executive aggrandizement. The decision struck down a decades-old precedent and granted the president unilateral authority to remove the heads of independent regulatory agencies without congressional interference. Objectively speaking, this centralization of power removed critical checks and balances, allowing the executive branch to reshape the administrative state according to its own political will. Again, without input from the people's branch of government. And here's the thing. At the end of the day, we can have a discussion on whether or not a president should be saddled with the head of a department that they have political disagreements with. Sure, I can understand on some level that if I was the head of some company, for example, and I didn't like my head of finance, well, maybe, I could have the logical, rational thinking to say maybe I should replace them with somebody whose financial leanings more closely align with my goals. But what about an entire department? What about an entire program funded and created by Congress, by the people? You see, in contrast to the Chief Justice and Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Elena Kagan stated during the Slaughter argument that, quote, the more realistic danger here is that we'll have an agency as authorized by Congress by law that won't have any employees in it. And this is indeed a realistic danger because it isn't hypothetical. It is the Trump administration's express goal in many cases, as they actively seek to convert multi-member commissions into single-director agencies. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, the dismantling of agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Department of Education. These agencies are in the process of being administratively gutted, notwithstanding the lack of congressional votes to do so legislatively. Bipartisan multi-member commissions functionally converted into one-party agencies, again, in contravention of law, which should worry everyone, whether you like the agency or department or not, is irrelevant. Thankfully, at least for now, while yes, American institutions are weakened, they aren't gone. Courts can still matter, resistance still matters, elections still matter. So the US is not a dictatorship, but that is almost the point. Modern democratic erosion often happens in this gray zone. Not dead, still healthy, still voting, still litigating, still resisting. But with each crisis, the worry becomes how much stress can the system take before the guardrails become decorative? And speaking of normalization, when did it suddenly become normal to hand over sensitive data information like our phone number to complete just about any and every online purchase? I figure, well, maybe this is somehow important for delivery, but no, I make one online purchase and suddenly my phone is inundated with spam calls and text messages. And the worst part is that making it stop is easier said than done. Even the best anti-spam systems have cracks, and some spam will slip through sooner or later. As long as your contact details are on the web, you won't get peace of mind for very long. The remedy? Remove your data from the internet altogether. This way, you'll prevent spammers from ever learning your phone number, email, or home address in the first place, which is why I use the tools from the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Incogni tracks down and removes your personal data from multiple sites, including online directories, people's search sites, and even commercial databases. And I don't have to do anything. They do all the legwork. Just sign up and give them permission to act on your behalf, and then they go out and find the list that you're on and demand that you be taken off. Plus, if you sign up for their unlimited plan, you have access to their custom removal feature to take down almost everything that is exposed about you online. Simply point them in the direction where your data is being exposed, and their privacy experts will handle the rest. So while it may seem that taking back your personal data is challenging, their custom removal feature makes it effortless for you. Again, just give Incogni the link to a website that is sharing your information and watch it disappear in real time. And you know, they can't harm you if they can't find you. So use the code Ashton at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/Ashton. Now, if I wanted to make a clickbait version of this video, I'd probably do it like this. America is collapsing. Europe is civilized. Roll credits. Yeah, but that would be wrong, because VDEM's 2026 reporting illustrates that democratic backsliding is happening elsewhere too. In fact, it has now reached stable democracies, and 6 of the 10 newly autocratizing countries it identified were in Europe and North America. And that list included Italy and the United Kingdom. And that should make everyone uncomfortable, because Italy and the United Kingdom are not usually grouped with Hungary or Turkey. They are Western democracies, NATO countries, EU or former EU countries. Countries with courts, newspapers, opposition parties, and established constitutional cultures. But that is exactly what makes this equally intriguing and important. Backsliding in the West rarely starts by abolishing parliament. It starts by normalizing pressure. In Italy, Freedom House still rates the country as free, but it has warned that corruption concerns and erosion in anti-corruption safeguards. Reporters Without Borders ranked Italy 56th out of 180 countries in its 2026 World Press Freedom Index, down from 49th in 2025. And again, this does not mean that Italy is authoritarian. It isn't. But it does mean that the pressure points are real. To give another example, in the United Kingdom, Freedom House still gives the country a very high score, 92 out of 100. But the UK has also been flagged by VDEM as part of a broader Western autocratization trend. And that tension is really important because the country, again, can still be broadly free, but still moving in the wrong direction. Now, let's talk about Germany and France, because these are especially interesting, not just because I live in the region where the two countries intersect. Germany is still one of the strongest democracies in the world. Freedom House gives Germany a score of 95 out of 100. But Germany is also facing one of the most serious far-right challenges in post-war history. The AfD has surged nationally, with Reuters reporting polling as high as 29% in 2026. The party is especially strong in eastern Germany, and Germany's domestic intelligence agency designated the AfD as right-wing extremist in 2025, although that classification has been tied up in legal challenges. So Germany is not a collapsing democracy, but it is a strong democracy under stress. I think what a lot of people worry about here is whether the post-war firewall, the informal rule that democratic parties do not cooperate with anti-democratic extremes, can survive voter frustration, migration politics, housing shortages, inflation, and social media radicalization. Because, again, democratic decline does not always begin with the extremist party winning power outright. Sometimes it begins when mainstream parties start adopting extremist frames. And France, again, is kind of similar to the German story. Freedom House gives France 89 out of 100, still firmly in the free category. And the Economist Intelligence Unit recently reclassified France as a full democracy in its 2025 Democracy Index. But France also shows how democracies can be highly functional and yet deeply unstable at the exact same time. Despite a slew of legal battles, the far right remains electorally powerful. Civic space has faced concerns. Public broadcasting, media pluralism, policing, protests, and institutional trust are all reoccurring pressure points there. So neither France nor Germany is lost to democracy, but both countries show that democracy can be institutionally strong, yet politically fragile. And this is the pattern that we see across Western nations. The danger is not always collapse. Sometimes the danger is normalization. But I do think that if you want to understand the worst case scenario for democratic backsliding inside the West, or at least inside the European political family, you have to talk about Hungary. For years, Viktor Orban's Hungary was the model of illiberal democracy. And that phrase was doing a lot of work. Hungary still had elections, but the playing field became increasingly unfair. Media ownership shifted. Courts were pressured. Civil society was harassed. Public money flowed through loyal networks. Election rules were rewritten. State institutions became partisan tools. The European Parliament said in 2025 that Hungary suffered persistent breaches of rule of law principles, citing concerns including judicial independence, corruption, misuse of EU funds, attacks on civil society, the electoral system, and media freedom. It also described Hungary as, quote, a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy. Freedom House says that Hungary fell from free to partially free in 2019 and lost 25 points in its freedom in the world score between 2010 and 2025. And this is the classic authoritarian playbook in democratic clothing. Once you win power, you change the rules. Then you capture the referees. The next step is to dominate the information space and then, keep holding elections, but under the conditions that make losing less likely. But the story of Hungary has a surprising twist of late because in April of this year, Orban lost power. Péter Tisza party won major victory, ending Orban's 16-year rule. The UK House of Commons Research Service described the result as a 2/3 parliamentary majority for Tisza. That is huge. It shows that even deeply damaged democracies can still surprise us. But it also shows how hard democratic repair can be, because winning an election does not magically rebuild independent courts, public media, anti-corruption systems, or trust. In fact, the International Bar Association reported that Hungary's new government faces the challenge of repairing rule of law damage while also trying to unlock billions in EU funds that had been blocked over democratic concerns. And they have to be really careful here, because restoring the rule of law after autocratic capture is legally complex. If new democratic governments use illegal shortcuts to undo authoritarian damage, it can accidentally reproduce the same logic it claims to oppress. That is a hard lesson from Hungary. Democracy can be broken quickly, but repair is slower. And sometimes the people trying to fix democracy are forced to operate inside institutions that were redesigned to prevent that repair. So where is democracy strengthening, or at least holding up best? Well, there is no perfect country in this regard. That being said, the strongest democracies do tend to share certain traits. The Economist Intelligence Unit's 2025 Democracy Index found that after 8 years of decline, the global democracy stabilized somewhat in 2025. It also found that full democracies remained relatively stable, with Nordic countries anchoring the top spots and New Zealand ranking second. Freedom House gives Finland a perfect 100 out of 100. New Zealand scores 99 out of 100. But Germany, Canada, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and others remain among the world's strongest liberal democracies. So what do all of these places tend to have? Honestly, I think it all boils down to a high level of trust. And I've spoken about this before in other videos, but these countries have high electoral integrity, fully funded public broadcasters that are not simply government propaganda arms, courts that politicians may dislike but cannot easily manipulate, things that the U.S. is still desperately trying to cling on to. But they also have the hallmarks that the U.S. doesn't have, that do tend to help when it comes to increasing levels of trust within their government. They tend to have coalition politics that forces negotiation. They have less winner-takes-all constitutional design or a two-party us versus them mentality. And they usually have stronger local administrations with higher participation rates in those local elections. But last and most importantly, they have social systems that reduce the sense that every election is like some basic fight for survival. And listen, I get it. Politics are incredibly emotional. But when people believe losing an election means losing their healthcare, housing, legal status, bodily autonomy, or their child's future, politics becomes existential. And when politics becomes existential, voters become more willing to tolerate anti-democratic tactics from their own side. This does not mean welfare states automatically produce democracy, but social stability can reduce the emotional fuel for authoritarian politics. And it's important to remember, democracy is not just a voting system, it is a pressure management system. And, well, some Western countries are better at managing that pressure than others. So where does this leave the West? Realistically, not in one category in particular, and I think that is kind of the big takeaway from this video. The West is splitting. Some countries remain strong liberal democracies, others are flawed but stable, and a few are under some serious pressure. But some are trying to recover and showcase that elections can survive after liberal democracy has been hollowed out. I think the mistake that many make is simply thinking democracy dies only when voting stops. But truthfully, often the voting is one of the last things to go. The deeper concern is whether the vote still happens inside a system where power can be checked, facts can be reported, courts can say no, opposition can compete, and citizens can organize without fear. Because at the end of the day, democracy is not just the right to choose a leader, it's the right to replace one. And if a leader can use democratic power to make replacement impossible, then democracy has just become a trapdoor. Because the future of democracy in the West will not be decided by whether we call ourselves democracies. It'll be decided by whether we defend the boring, annoying, frustrating institutions that keep democracy from becoming a majority rule with no breaks. And it only works if enough people decide that they are worth protecting before they're gone. But what do you think of the state of democracy in your own country? Is it declining, stable, or rebuilding? And what gives you hope for the future? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!